Welcome to Krown Gridiron Nation on TSN, presented by PointsBet. Mike's there in Toronto, Gord is in Vancouver, and I'm right here on Football Island. So let's jet off to the 2-minute offense. Led by a 21-point third quarter, the Crimson Tide cruised to a comfortable win over number 12 Ole Miss. John Mechie III with a TD reception. More on him later. For the Rebels, defensive lineman Tavius Robinson of Guelph with 6 tackles, and Calgary's Dean Leonard with 5. Penn State blanking Indiana, an okay day for Ottawa senior edge Jesse Luketa, 3 tackles contributing to the Penn State shutout. The London, Ontario running back was off the sheet last week, but he made up for it against Charlotte in a 10-point win. Chase Brown, 257 yards rushing, the top Canadian performance since Chuba Hubbard went off for 296 against Kansas in 2019. Brother Sidney with a decent game too, 6 tackles and a forced fumble. The leading Canadian receiver in the NC2A, Nick Mardner, with a quiet 3-reception day. I'll tell you what was loud was the Warrior upset over 18th-ranked Fresno State. The Lachine Machine merely had to idle in Coastal Carolina's wipeout of Louisiana Monroe. Enoch Maconzo with a pair of tackles. A one-sided loss for Rutgers, but it was good to see Ottawa senior DB Patrice Rene back with 4 solo tackles. Ottawa freshman Wesley Bailey with a sack and 2 tackles. Davian Alford with a pair of receptions for 29 yards, and linebacker Jeffrey Kenton Arcu with a pair of stops as Syracuse loses in a squeaker to Florida State. Luigi Villain has been a consistent performer for Wake Forest this past week. 3 tackles and a TFL in a narrow win over Louisville. Oh man, the BC Lions have to be happy with what they see out of draft pick Daniel Joseph. He made 5 tackles in NC State's win over Louisiana Tech. On the opposite side, Sam Emelis had 3 grabs for 27 yards. It may have been winning ugly, but it was winning, the first of the year for quarterback Curtis Rourke and Ohio over Akron. 7 of 12 for Rourke with a pick and a TD. Only had 58 yards, though. Mississauga's Jetta Ladd tossed in 5 tackles on defense. Maybe we got numb to outstanding rushing performances with Chuba Hubbard's exploits, but Chase Brown's 257-yard performance for Illinois ranks as one of the best. Look at this. I am not sure if we will ever have another Canadian put up the number that Ruben Mays did against Oregon way back in 1984. That was an NCAA record that stood for over 3 decades. But look at Brown's company on this list of Canadian running backs with over 250 yards in a single Division I game. So another Canadian emerges with an eye-popping performance. It's like whack-a-mole every week. Brown, Mardner, Luketa, and Mechie III. Each of them has a path to be the best Canadian stateside. But what is that path, Gord?
Oh, well, let's take them one by one, I guess. Jesse Luketa, his path to winning it, I mean, for starters, is voters recognizing that a defensive guy can win the award. But secondly is continuing to be a standout for a Penn State team that is, at least right now, in a national playoff spot. Now, they have a massive showdown against Iowa this weekend. One of those 2 teams, which are ranked 3 and 4 in the country right now, has to lose that game and will drop out at least temporarily. So for Luketa, I think he needs to keep showing in those big games, and that Iowa game this weekend is a great place to start. That's going to be nationally televised in both countries. There will be lots of eyes on it, so he'll have a chance to shine. For Mardner, the biggest thing that he needs is his team to keep moving in the right direction. They upset Fresno State this past weekend. His line on the day was a little bit quieter than it had been in the previous 2, but if the Warriors give people a reason to pay attention to them, that can only help Nick Mardner, because it didn't look like there was much of that a couple of weeks ago.
Absolutely. And, if you're looking at the receivers, and I agree with you, you look at Penn State's schedule, it gets really tough like it hasn't been tough already. They've already faced 2 in the top 20. But, you've got the battle of the receivers. You've got the deep threat in Hawaii who's averaging over 20 yards per carry. And then you've got a guy who's become a possession guy in Mechie. Jim talked about, are we losing guys in the shuffle a little bit? Are we taking these performances for granted? Which I think we really did to a degree, especially toward the end of Chuba Hubbard's tenure at Oklahoma State, because we expected big gains every week. It's the same thing with Mechie. Let's kind of put this in perspective for a minute, that he's the leading receiver in terms of catches, double digits. He's got 10 more than anybody else on the team, with the number 1 team in the country. Let's not take that for granted. And maybe we were looking at some of the deep numbers he was putting up last year in a really star-studded receiving group. This guy's still doing spectacular stuff at Alabama. I hope that doesn't get lost on voters when we get down to the Cornish voting.
But if Chase Brown piles up another 190-yard game, maybe a plus 200-yard game, voters will have to pay attention.
Absolutely, they're going to have to pay attention to him. And I think one of the reasons, there's a couple reasons I think he's flown under the radar. One is that Illinois has not gotten off to a spectacular start this year. They're dealing with a new coaching staff. Brett Bielema comes in there. They took a little bit to kind of find their way. It looks like they're starting to get rolling now. I think the other thing, too, though, is that he also is a little bit overshadowed by his brother. Sidney Brown was there a year before he became a prominent member of that team, and a guy that we talked about on a regular basis a year before Chase did as well. And Chase is just blossoming before our eyes this season, and he's kind of relatively new on the scene that way, certainly in comparison to his brother. So I think that that's part of the reason he's flying under the radar too. But I got to be honest, if you're not paying attention after 257, I don't know when you will.
And I think maybe there would have been more of a buildup if we had have seen 100, 120, 150 before we see the monster game that he had. And we didn't see that. So, the question now is, was that spectacular number a one-off, or are we going to see the more consistent 150, 120, 99, 170? Are we going to see stuff like that? I don't know. My gut tells me that that's a one-off for at least this year. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that he's able to post a couple of another 2 or 3 big, huge games like that. Then he gets into the conversation. Right now, he's got to prove that it's more than just a one-off.
Mike mentioned questions. We have the answer to who the best Canadians are in this week's Stateside 5. He is 5th in the 5 for Alabama's number 1 target, John Mechie III. 3 catches, 35 yards, and a touchdown strike. Daniel Joseph has a regular reservation in the 5 with NC State. This week, 5 tackles, a sack, a TFL, and a forced fumble. First time in the 5 for Montreal's Evans Clarcius for UConn, the Team Canada grad, with 4 grabs for 68 yards and a TD. Lethbridge, Alberta's Isaiah Bagna, Boise State's defensive bagman with 3 sacks on the day. And the running back of renown, Mr. Chase Brown from London, Ontario, 257 yards rushing and 2 trips to the Promised Land. Just ahead, we'll go to where being offensive is a good thing. Welcome back, everyone. Now's the time to travel to the land of unpredictability. That would be Canada in our 3-minute warning. A COVID capacity crowd of 15,000 at TD Place for Panda 52. Let's pick it up in the second half with the GGs leading 16-7. Kalik Johnson into the end zone for the Ravens. That made it 16-14 Ottawa. Then Carleton would take the lead on a Brandon Forcier 32-yarder, 16-17. Let's go to the final minute. We always do in the Panda game. Campbell Fair from 45 with a chance to win. It is good. And you can color the Panda garnet and gray for Ottawa. Western over Laurier by 20. The Stings win when they run well. Keon Edwards, 138 yards and a TD. Trey Humes, 103 yards and 2 TDs. Sherby, Montreal, not even close. Bertrand Boileau with 106 on the ground. Dimitri Morand, 22 of 32 for 233. Montreal rolls to an easy win over Sherby. Manitoba, Alberta. We've seen Nick Dembski, we've seen Anthony Coombs, and we've seen Jamel Lyles. The next one for the Herd, Gavin Cobb. 95 yards from scrimmage, 2 TDs, plus a 91-yard punt return touchdown, 203 all-purpose yards for Cobb. Manitoba all alone in first. Dinos, Rams. The Queen City not always kind to Cowtown. This one no different. Rams took control in the second, never looked back. The star on the day, Regina's Gowan Aravanathan, 2 picks, 58 yards the other way. Dinos need a cleaner sheet to repeat. It's a major upset to everyone but the Rams. X and Bishops. This was the most entertaining game of the week. A little bit of everything here. Nothing but touchdowns all through the first half. 21-14 X at the break. Bishops would tie this up at 22 on this Kennedy to Schillingford connection. Then this, X going for the field goal, and it's blocked, and it turns into a 51-yard scoop and score. Jake Riley rumbles for 6. Bishops surrender to safety. Then with under a minute left, Isaac Fina clicks to Silas Fina. A fine finish for you. 31-yard TD, and X marks the spot in the W column. Now, I don't think we've ever quite seen a year like this in the OUA over the last 3 decades. More specifically, this OUA West. None of these teams can break free from each other. For the benefit of our viewers, Mike, try to deconstruct what we have seen in the first couple of weeks here.
Are you kidding? I mean, this is only a half-an-hour show, right? It's been great is what it's been. I mean, you're seeing teams like Western get knocked off by Guelph, which was at least a bit of an upset, but then Guelph loses to Windsor. How does that happen? We've seen blowout scores that don't indicate how close the games have been, where you have Western in a couple of cases has been close after 3 quarters, and then in the 4th quarter they just blow it open. So I think it's fantastic, and it was going to be a tough enough conference to begin with, but if Windsor is better than I think people gave it credit for, I think all of a sudden this just opens up the second half of the season just to be an absolute sprint where every game is up in the air when they kick it off. And as somebody who sat through more than his fair share of blowouts, I just put me down in favor of this. This is fantastic.
Yeah, I agree. One of those games that looked a lot more of a blowout than it actually was that McMaster Waterloo game this past weekend. The final score was, I believe, it was 34-14. But if you look at the stats, like there's almost equivalent offensive production from both sides. You know, Trey Ford throws for another 350 plus this week, and they lose by multiple scores. So that was a much tighter game than the final score would indicate too. One of the things that'll be an interesting wrinkle into this is that Guelph gets a couple crossover games now. Now they start with Queens, who appears to be the class of the OUA East at this point in time. But that conference generally, that side of the conference, I guess I should say, generally is seen as the weaker half. So Guelph may benefit from a couple crossover games. On that eastern side, it's a little more cut and dry. Queens, like I said, looks like the clear top dog. One team I'm keeping an eye on, though, after pulling off the win in the Panda game and with the adversity they've gone through, the Ottawa GGs all of a sudden are in a sneakily good position. They have not played at home yet this year, so they get 3 straight home games to finish the season. If they can build off that Panda game momentum and ride kind of the emotional wave that they probably are riding right now, they might be able to turn some heads in that OUA East and become a factor as well.
The Canadian Football League continues to struggle with offense in 2021, but U Sports games are producing 900, 1,000, 1,100 plus yards of total combined offense regularly. Both took a whole year off. They're playing the same sport. So why is the CFL missing offense that U Sports is not in many of their games, Gord?
I mean, I think there's a couple factors that I see here, and a third that I know Mike's going to touch on, but one of them is that you're not seeing the proliferation of American defenders in U Sports that you see in the CFL, and what you're seeing a lot of CFL teams do these days is load up on Americans on that side of the ball and make sure they've got a shutdown defense. And so, yeah, like that's a big factor that just affects the CFL, doesn't affect U Sports. And they also have these bigger rosters where they can rotate guys in and out that are going to impact the game and serve specialty roles on that side of the ball. I think the other thing on the offensive side of the ball, though, you see more continuity at the college level. The coordinators are working with guys for multiple years. In most programs, they've been able to work with their guys over this past year despite not being able to play. And whereas in the CFL, you get a lot of one-year contracts, a lot of guys coming in and out, I think you necessarily see slightly simpler offensive schemes at this point in time in the CFL than what you're seeing at the college level. I see more innovation watching college ball in Canada on the offensive side of the ball than I see at the CFL, and it infuriates me as a fan sometimes, but when I step back and realize there's a good reason for that there's just that lack of continuity, I think that might be a factor as well, as these U Sports coordinators just know their guys better.
A couple of things from my end. I think that for the most part, when you've had this kind of layoff as well and no preseason games, I assume, and I think everybody expected the defenses to be ahead of the offenses when they broke camp. That just seems the way it goes. The lack of continuity, as you said, with our roster in Toronto, we had great turnover on both sides of the football. But the other thing that I think the teams have had to deal with is a rash of injuries against quarterbacks. Winnipeg is the only team, I think, that has gone through games without losing a quarterback, if not for the full game. We've seen in Montreal in their last two games, Vernon Adams get nicked up in games against Toronto and against Hamilton. So while, the play has still been pretty good and there are some really good backups in the league, we've seen rookie quarterbacks take over in a couple of different circumstances in the CFL, but we haven't had that continuity because of the injuries with quarterbacks. And I think that's one of the main reasons why you do see offense down a little bit in the CFL.
Just ahead, only we knows who the Weekend Warriors are. Welcome back. Here are your CJFL standings on the road to the Canadian Bowl. Weekend Warriors, gritty performances that are sometimes battered and bloody. So what do you got for us, Gord?
Well, I think given that lead in, the obvious choice this week is Regina quarterback Sawyer Bittner. And you can just listen to the story he tells himself.
I'm not sure. Somebody got their hand in there, but it's all good. I was never very handsome anyway, so it's all good.
Like this is in line with the type of play that you normally get?
Yeah, I'm from Moose Jaw, so we're a gritty group, so yeah.
Exactly, thanks so much.
Thank you.
That's right, Sawyer from Moose Jaw made his contribution to a huge upset by the Regina Rams over the Calgary Dinos. We talked last week about how the Calgary Dinos look like the class of this conference, and then Regina comes in and upsets the apple cart. And Bittner, not starting as I mentioned, but adds a rushing touchdown on the ground as the short yardage quarterback, and he earned his way in on that one. So for that alone, he gets my Weekend Warrior nod.
I'm going to go to a program we never talk about, and that's Windsor. And we were talking earlier in this program about, the parity that maybe is emerging even more so in U Sports than ever before. I just want to give a tip of that. David Aidnurin, and David, I hope I got your last name right, 130 yards on 26 carries. He carried for more yardage against Guelph than the entire Western Mustangs team did the week before, and that's saying something. And Coach Cercelli in Windsor, I think, is on the right track there. He's got a great track record at the high school and U Sports level as an assistant coach. He's coached, at basically every level you can in the country. And I like the fact that he's a guy that's now taking something from other programs, in this case Western, and bringing it to Windsor. And, it's a great football family. So for David, 130 yards, congratulations on that. Nobody saw that coming, so you're my Weekend Warrior.
Around the bend, it's our fearless picks for the weekend ahead. Welcome back, everyone. Last week, we were slightly more respectable with our U Sports picks. This week, we have one for every day of the weekend. Friday, it's a battle for first in the AUS as St. FX rolls into Sackville to take on Mount A. The Mounties are 2-0. with an offense that has scored 10 points in both wins. While the X-Men are led by quarterback Silas Fina, who is fourth in the nation in passing at just over 300 yards per game. So go with X and the under here. Saturday sees McMaster at Windsor with the Marauders as 1-point favorites, even though they are on the road. Mac has had fits with teams who run well, and Windsor proved that they are all about the ground attack against Guelph in their upset victory. It's been an upside-down season in the OUA West, so let's go way out on a limb and take Windsor. Sunday, we are wondering if the clock will strike midnight for the Cinderella Concordia Stingers as they take their cardiac antics to Laval. 3 weeks ago, the Rouge et Or would be favored by over 2 TDs in this matchup, but that's only down to 5 points today. Still, take the home side and the under. Time for NCAA picks of the week. Be brave. I'll send it off to you, Gord.
Okay, well, again, your Gord's lock of the week to bet in the opposite direction is BYU -5 over Boise State. Now, this is as much about Boise State as it is about BYU, but I'll start with BYU because they might low-key be the best team in the western half of the continent right now. They've had some really good non-conference wins over a couple of Pac-12 schools, including Arizona State. Oregon lost this past weekend in a disappointing effort for them. And BYU is continuing to ride the wave. A lot of people thought they'd take a big step back, losing a superlative player like Zach Wilson, the second overall pick in last spring's draft. They thought that BYU might take a little step back, but it looks like they're keeping the beat rolling. And on the other side, the Boise State Broncos still struggling to find their footing under new coach Andy Avalos. They're fallen to 2-3 with their loss last week against Nevada, and you thought they were building momentum with the win against Utah State, only for them to give it back again. One guy that has still been performing, though, is Isaiah Bagna for the Boise State Broncos. I would look for him to have an impact here, but I still like BYU, who is in great form right now against a shaky Boise State team, to cover that 5-point spread.
Well, you just made our head coach, Ryan Dinwiddie, who played quarterback at Boise State, very happy by picking against them with the way that you've gone this year. And I'm not much better, so I'm not going to criticize. I'm looking for sort of the power game here, 3 versus 4, Iowa taking on Penn State, and you've got the trio of Canadians at Penn State. Both teams are pretty good running the football. I think maybe there's a bit of an advantage to Penn State in terms of throwing the football. But, home field has to be something here. And you've got this matchup of 2 teams that could end up playing in the Big Ten championship game in Indianapolis later this year. I'm just really curious to see, Iowa. They have lost to Canadian. Alaric Jackson's gone to the Rams in the NFL now. AJ Jackson, I guess. But this looks like a pretty good game. I always love these, these divisional games, these conference games, and Penn State's got a tough schedule ahead with Ohio State and Michigan State still to come. They better win this one, but man, I really think home field means a lot in this game. And with the son of another CFL legend, Arlen Bruce IV, playing for Iowa, I think I'll give the tip of the hat to the Hawkeyes on this one.
Next week, we will announce the kickoff to football weekend in Canada right here on this very show. Plus, we will start down the great Canadian Goat Trail. But for now, this is Jim Mullen saying, let's get out to the game.